Hey everyone, today we're going to set a little bit of mosaic tile. Sometimes we get all kinds of different sizes, shapes, and patterns of this. A lot of times it's mesh mount on the back, usually no issue. But what happens when it's either the clear plastic on the face or paper face? How do we set tile like that, get the paper off, get the plastic off, and end up with a good result? Well, let's take a look. So here we have a fiber cement board, and just like me in the summertime, this gets real thirsty when it's warm out, so it's still nice and warm out here. So we want to get our substrate clean. We want to give it a drink. If you notice how long it took to absorb that water. So it wouldn't hurt to probably give it another drink, because we don't want that thin set going off on us too fast. We want to give it plenty of time so it sets up, gets the right strength, because we've given it the right amount of time to cure. Okay. So once we've added water to it, now we're ready to put some thin set down. So we just grab our regular 5/32 V-notch, right? Well, remember what our minimum thickness of thin set is. It's 3/32. So 5/32 held on a 45-degree angle, that's 5/64. Okay, that one's not going to work. So fine, easy. We'll just go with a 1/4 by 1/4. Well, once again, let's do the math. A 1/4 inch held on a 45-degree angle is only putting 1/8 of an inch of thin set down. Once we collapse those ridges, we're down to a 1/16 of an inch. That's 2/32. Kiss that one goodbye. So we're up to our 3/8, our 1/4 by 3/8 trowel held on a 45-degree angle. That's 3/16 of an inch, flattened out. That's 3/32. That's our minimum thickness for thin set. So held on a 45-degree angle. Let's give this a shot. So we've given it a drink. We've got our thin set here. We've given it a chance to slake. So one, remember, want to key in this mortar. Even though it's a really good substrate to get a bite to, we want to make sure we get our mortar keyed in. We want to make that sound that you hear. Once we have that keyed in, don't be shy about putting thin set down. Get enough there to work. So, especially when we do the gauge porcelain panels, sometimes guys are afraid to get the mortar up there, and they keep adding a scoop and putting a little bit more on and trying to work that. Nah, get the material on the surface, 45-degree angle, all the way across. When you start with a trowel, you don't want to start with nothing dry. If we do that, we start pulling mortar away. So, want to make sure we start with a little bit of thin set. We load the trowel so we have some on the leading edge. 45-degree angle, all the way across. Now we're going to set some glass mosaic, and this glass mosaic is about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch, or 1/4 of an inch thick. Well, this is 3/8 of an inch, or pushing a 1/4 inch thick right now. So what do we want to do? We want to knock these ridges down. So same thing, load the flat edge of your trowel, start up here, and you just want to knock the ridges down. Just enough pressure to make those ridges flat. You don't want to start with anything extra or come off with anything extra. You just want to end up with about the same amount you started with. You're not taking anything away from it now. We can take time to make it nice and flat. The flatter we get it, the flatter our tile is going to be, the less work we're going to have making it really a nice flat installation. So now we've got those all flattened out nice. So we start up here with our mosaic. If we had our layout lines, we would work to our layout lines. But since this is just a little sample of that, I'm going to just start here, put in a few sheets here, get it lined up pretty close to the outside edge of the board. Get that set there. Now notice, I could line them up to sheets, but if you ever notice, whenever you lay out a mosaic floor, you can start seeing sheet lines. So I like to break joint on it, on the sheet lines at least. Break joint so that you can't see the continuous sheet lines. So we get our material in, so our sheet lines aren't all the time hitting in the same row, because then you'll start seeing rows running all the way across your floor. So once we get this in, now we've got it there. Okay, we're done, right? No, of course we got to beat it in. What do we beat it in with? Well, grab your old grout nasty float like this. It's not good for anything else, right? Well, if you see how curved and how nasty this isn't going to beat in anything except the bottom of the trash can. Okay, we can use a flat trowel, nice and flat, Not too heavy. We can beat in with that, but sometimes on certain tiles and stones, it can leave a black mark behind. So just be careful if you use a flat trowel. Nothing wrong with it, just be sure you're not leaving marks behind. A fiberglass wood float, nice and flat. It has some weight to it, so it can beat in nicely, but sometimes on a glass tile, that might be a little bit too aggressive for it, and you can break tiles. So that's something else. It's a possibility of using, not necessarily discarding it. Something I like to use is a hard, like an epoxy float. It's really hard, make sure it's nice and flat. It hasn't sat out in the sun and had shovels and things sitting on it. So nice and flat, and now we come in here, we beat this in. Now that we have it beat in, now try and get your sheet lines as lined up as perfectly as you can. But the nice thing with this is once we pull this paper on the face, we can still come back and do a couple little micro adjustments if we need to. But the closer we get it right now, we want to be pretty much spot on where we want to be, because once we pull this paper, then we're going to have to end up moving all the rows to make it look right. So make sure it looks good. Now with the paper face tile, what you want to do, you want your sponge almost saturated wet where it's running off. Nice and really wet. And we're just going to make this nice and wet here. Now if you have adjacent work going on, you don't want to have water running off over on these other areas. So just get this nice and wet. Now we're going to give it some time while we work our way across. So that's one example of a little mosaic tile. Now one thing here, let's add a little bit more moisture here. This has already started to dry out. We're going to add a little bit of a different paper face mounted tile here. So same thing. We want to keep that 45-degree angle. Don't be shy with the thin set. 45-degree angle. If you see any skips or hops or things like that, either you have thin set that's already started to go off and it's starting to get lumps in it, or you got a bad bag of thin set. So if that's the case, get you some fresh thin set, especially if you're using, very expensive glass mosaic tile like this. You want to make sure that you're not wasting it. So same thing here. Load up the trowel, come back across this, knock down those ridges. Ridges are knocked down. So here's a little bit of a different glass, paper-faced mosaic. So same thing here, we still want that 3/30 seconds underneath. Get it close, and once again we're dealing with glass here, and now these are longer pieces of glass, and so these are going to be the same thing. If we start using something hard like a fiberglass float like this, we could very easily break these long glass pieces. So same thing, let's beat it in with this. So get this nice and close, double check where we're at. Check our heights too. Sometimes if you do just a little checking right now, you can make sure your sheets are lining up really nice and flat. If you have any adjustment, now would be the time to make it before you wet this paper. So your joints look good, everything's looking good there. So once again, we'll go back, right, get some water on this paper, and guess what? You see how this paper's already started to dry up? It's not really drying up, well it is, but it's soaking in that water and trying to get down to that bottom layer of glue. And we can't pull the paper on the face until that bottom layer of glue gets nice and wet. So we're just going to keep adding water to this as we keep setting a couple other examples of tile here. So we get the paper nice and wet. Try not to get too much water in there, so it's running down through the joints. We don't want that either. So just get it nice and wet one last time here. All right, so now I mentioned earlier that we have some of the plastic face. It has a clear plastic on the face. So let's set some of that tile. So same thing, we want to make sure we're nice and clean and our substrate has been dampened. But if you notice, this tile right here is a little bit thicker. So it's a little bit thicker, so it has room. This tile here is all very thin. This glass here is probably right at about 1/8 of an inch. That's a little bit thicker up there, maybe like 3/16, pushing 1/4 of an inch. But doesn't allow a whole lot of room for thin set. If we use our notch trowel, it's just going to squeeze up through the joints, and then we're just going to have a very unhappy finisher or helper tomorrow as he's coming back behind to scrape out all of our joints that we got dirty. So same thing, we're going to key in this, key in our substrate. Now we're not going to be shy about our thin set. But the thing is with this, since we have a little bit more room, we're not going to need to knock down those ridges because we've got room. We have enough room in the thickness of our tile. But we have to be careful. If we beat down too hard, we'll have a lot of bleed through and once again, a lot of cleanup the next day. And this here we're going to be able to clean up today. This over here, anything that we have to come bleeding through, we're not going to be able to fix until tomorrow. And that's all going to be coming out with a utility knife or a grout joint scraper. So now we've got our mortar applied. So let's set some tile here. This is a mosaic that was used on a job. I don't have all the A and B pieces, so I'm having to kind of put this together as I go. We'll try and do the best we can with the colors we've got and the pieces we've got. I just want to get them close because once we start beating it in, we're going to move those tiles all around anyhow. So once we have that, same thing. This we could go a little more aggressive. You could use a float like this. This heavier ceramic tile. So once you have that beat in, you want to make sure that the surface is clean. Any joints that are able to be, that still don't have any of the tape across them, we can clean those out. And now's the time to do any final tuning before we let this sit till tomorrow, and then we'll come back and pull. But you don't have a whole lot of, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room after you install this. Once it's installed, what you see is what you get. You're not going to adjust this tomorrow. That mortar's going to be dry, it's going to be hard, and it's not going to, these aren't going to move without popping them out and starting all over again. So make sure you're where you want to be, where you're happy with it, where your customer's going to be happy with it. So sometimes with this material, you got to go through and you've got to cut the sheets and then check the surface for being nice and flat. So sometimes you got to just do a little bit of adjustment. That's where our grid lines, our layout lines are so important. If you can see up close, you can see that these couple joints are pretty full with some mortar, so those will be something that'll have to be cleaned out tomorrow. But that's one of the good things also, is with that plastic on the face, it keeps it moist. That thin set doesn't dry out too fast. And then come tomorrow, it'll still be soft enough if you're doing it first thing in the morning. So one last section. If you've seen the earlier segment I did about how to put plastic on the face of tile and then make your cuts so that they don't fall apart. So we'll set a few of those tiles here now. So those are really thin mosaics. So we're going to do the same thing here. Get our notch. Once we have that, come in and load up the edge of our trowel. Start with, we finish with, make that nice and flat. But whatever we started with, we don't take away any, we don't leave any behind. So here's that mosaic. It's still got the plastic on the face. Really thin, really small glass. So we want to make sure we have that all nice and clean. Sometimes if we have these ridges, sometimes those don't like to get thin set through. So sometimes you can go through, add a little bit of mortar to the back side of your tiles before you set your running bond like this is here. So get them close, because once again, since we put the plastic on the face, it's not going to want to, you're not going to be able to do any adjusting come tomorrow. So because of the mesh, it comes all the way through on those, you need to put a little bit of extra mortar on your tiles there to begin with, so you have something to work with. Sometimes if you just set them dry, sometimes not enough mortar that goes there, and then it becomes a real problem. So get your sheets lined up. Sometimes you have a rogue one wants to not play nice, and get it all lined up in there. Then same thing, we're back to glass, back to the hard rubber float. So this has got a little bit of bleed through coming. You can see it coming through the mesh. So we'll get this as clean as we can. Get this all nice and clean. It wouldn't hurt for us to come through and get a brush and do a little bit of brushing in here. Brush these joints to try and get a little excess mortar out. And it looks like we've got a little bit of tuning to do, but now's the time to do that tuning. Sometimes when these pieces that are a running bond and they're a real thin mosaic like this, sometimes they don't always line up perfect. Well, now's the time to make them perfect. If we wait till tomorrow, we'll have to rip that whole piece out, maybe 2 or 3 pieces to get it to line up. Then check our joints, make sure our joints are all lined up the way we want them to be. All right, looking pretty good. Let's come back over here and see how our paper-faced mosaic is doing. Give it one last drink. Oh, you can see once it starts to peel like that, it's already in pretty good shape. So if it peels, you don't, if it's not dragging, see right there, a little corner is dragging a little bit. So grab whatever corners you have available, whatever corners start to lift. How nicely, if you give it enough time, like I have quite done here. So if you don't, you're going to have that problem right there. So I probably just didn't get enough moisture all the way to the edge. Same thing up there. But you can see by doing that, we're starting to lift a few tiles. So we might have to peel off a few tiles, peel the paper off of them, and get them reset in there. Right there, pretty close. Looks like 3. You want to play nice, but you got good mortar contact coming through. They were nicely embedded in that mortar, had good transfer to the back. So we'll do those like that. This one up here, yep, it's just the same row. So if we haven't given it enough, something we can do, put a little more on it. We'll give that another couple minutes, and if we have a little bit of excess there, give that a few more minutes. And yes, if you get it where you've given it enough time and it's wet enough, it peels off just really nicely like that. And then we're going to want to come through and clean up some of these joints. Because right now is the time to do it. Tomorrow may be too late. You can still do it tomorrow. It's just going to take a lot more work. So I will grab a brush and clean some of this up. And then we'll see you tomorrow morning. I will come in here and I will peel the plastic on that, show how to do that, and show how a little bit of quick dressing up on this tile. And then we'll be ready to, after we give it the right amount of cure time, we're ready for ground.